Okay, we now have the opportunity for just before lunch for 15 minutes for comments from each of the groups about where you've got to in this enlightened sort of discussion about localization or generalization. Who'd like to start for me? I can see that group looks keen, I think. Oh, there you are.
We grappled with the question of localization versus generalization, and we didn't come to a resolution of the issue.
No surprise.
But we recognize that it's important to have localized goals as well as generalizable knowledge, but then every time you develop a program, you need to adapt it again to the local culture. So ultimately, there can never be fully generalizable programs, but you can have a program you hopefully can adapt, have a systematic model for including local partners as equal partners in the program, and sharing with funding and development of program, so it's appropriate to that culture and acceptable and sustainable and scalable. So any other points? Yeah.
And just one other thing that we talked about was just like the question of localization being kind of could mean many different things, and one common recent use of the word refers more to less about cultural and contextual adaptation, but more about kind of power distribution, funding distribution being much more localized rather than starting somewhere in the global north or a high-income country and then being kind of, the power being shared, but who's starting off with the power to begin with. And often when we think about localization, we actually mean that other aspect of kind of distributing more of the power to the local communities. And yeah, that was something that we didn't resolve, but we discussed.
Any other comments from the group? No? Okay. Thank you very much. How about this group over here? I feel like one of those game show people. No? Thank you.
Yeah, so we also spoke about, we did go on tangents a lot, but when we spoke about localization versus generalization in the context of academia and the theories that we use, and how when it is generalized, because of the Western hegemony, it will mostly be those biases, and most of the other parts of the countries have their own theories and their own knowledge systems, but those are very specific to those locations, while the Western culture has a more generalized nature across it, which gives it a sense of dominance, and that would create hardships when you go to localize, because there would be theories and knowledge systems that work in certain local context of a country, but would not apply in even the neighboring country. So how can we create a theory or any knowledge system that can be generalized to the global south, but also if there is a need to create generalizable knowledge, that if just localization would work and we do not need the generalization that everyone keeps talking about in academic circles. But we also spoke about, like, when we do bring people from other countries and discuss and use, like, talk about the diversity, but how much of it is namesake diversity, because apart from the distinction of race and ethnicity that we've been talking about, class comes into play. And most of these people are the local elites then, who have the opportunity to come abroad and study abroad and then are employed abroad because they have the credentials that make them more employable in, like, the Western nations. So that creates an elitist structure, and they do not truly represent the people of their country. Like we were having, I think you should talk about the example you were talking about at Trinity or something.
I study Middle Eastern studies in Trinity, and obviously a lot of my professors are from the Middle East, but and we have exchanges with universities from the Middle East, and the students that often come in feel very detached from what our professors talk about, because our professors are very removed from the realities they come from. They probably lived abroad for a very long time, and they see their own country with complete different eyes than someone who's lived there up until recently. So there is always this conflict in my course or in my classes in Trinity about whether our professors actually do represent the country they come from properly, or if they're represented as someone who's lived abroad for a long time and speaks to a Western audience, which is completely different than if you would speak to a local audience. So.
Yep. No, thank you. That's good. Anything more from this group? Okay. No, thank you. Up the back. Thank you.
Great. So to start, we kind of flipped the framing, or sort of challenged the framing, I guess, about this issue of tailoring, that it sort of assumes that you're bringing something from the outside and then introducing it into a community. And the real need to understand what's happening in that community, what are the local innovations, what are the existing practices that may actually link to evidence, and so helping to draw that line and building from that. We also then talked about that it's not an either or. Of course, when you are working with local communities and engaging with local communities, you need to acknowledge that innovations and adaptations will always occur, and also understand ways that we can capture and better understand what are those different ways that even the local implementers are changing, even if it's a standard protocol or model, to fit that local culture or to fit the needs of the population, which all good practitioners do, all good clinicians do. But if there are, and we know that there are ways, simple ways that people can capture those different tweaks and adaptations, but we're not always systematically collecting that, because we do, or in our group, I think we acknowledge that there's a value to understanding and being able to generalize so that we can improve and inform sort of the practice globally, and help understand how to ensure quality and impact lessons are shared among different practitioners. Do you want to add?
Yeah, I just want, in this discussion, reflecting on some of the power inequities. So, for example, on one of my studies, our studies with colleagues in Nigeria, it was required that the U.S. institution be the contact institution. That sets up a power dynamic. But when we actually started doing the work, and I've worked with colleagues in Nigeria for 7 or 8 years now, all the work was localized from Nigeria, the leadership in Nigeria, the engagement of communities. So even the development and selection of implementation strategies was led. So I think there's ways to think about how, like, strategies, how power dynamics might be tailored and adapted, because we need to be thinking about that, as we do these processes. And then another project in Malawi, we have an implementation strategy developed in the US, but we're working closely together with ministries of health, with local provider organizations, in thinking about adaptations and tracking those adaptations. And we talked a little bit about how we can use a technique called periodic reflections, or approaches to understand adaptations and what are the dynamics of tailoring and what that really means in the implementation process.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there a group up the back there that would like to tell us their discussion? Thank you.
So yeah, we kind of went away with the conversation and talked about power, but I suppose we thought about localization, generalization, in the sense local being the insider and the general being the outsider, and whether which one is perhaps more credible in sort of doing research. And then we said, maybe it's not about being inside or outside, but rather it's about the power, the power differences between someone who's inside versus someone who's outside. And then we sort of went on and talked about basically, what can you do for both parties involved that they can ensure that their basically power does not negatively affect each other or the research outcome, but rather work together into sort of building something better or researching something better. So there's some points made about basically approaching someone not with maybe imposing what your expertise on them, but rather sort of, listening to them and hearing what they know better than you, which is their lived experience, versus you might have knowledge on the sort of the theories, and sort of marrying this kind of those experiences together. And we talked also as well about sometimes it's important not to minimize your power very much, but rather to sort of leverage it into something positive, because by using your power you can empower other people as well.
Okay.
Is there anything else?
No, thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah,
No.
thanks.
No, thank you very much. Is there any other group I haven't heard from or comment? Yes?
Important to keep in mind that a lot of the knowledge that we have, and even for us to think about the language that we're holding this conference in, which is English, right? A lot of the knowledge, and when we talk about this, again, generalization, happens mostly, if not uniquely, in English. So there are amazing colleagues that I have in Colombia, in other Latin American countries that speak Spanish, and I'm sure everyone here can relate at least to some of their partners who speak French, who speak another language. But that knowledge never makes it to a larger context, or cannot often be generalized, again, because most of the conversations that we have and most of the things that we do in these spaces are held in English. Okay,
no, thank you. Visas, English, very strong, thank you. I'm going to wrap up, but I want to tell a small story. I was once in Tanzania and doing a training and turning myself inside out to be Tanzanian, and the people said to me, Maryanne, you give us the sandwiches, we'll decide if we eat them. And I found that a very helpful sort of thinking about humility, how humble we are in this space. So, but thank you very much. I said that because we're about to have sandwiches, so you decide whether you eat them. I think we have an hour's break and then we resume after that. So see you in an hour's time. Thank you. Thank you.
Sorry, can I just make a quick request as well? When you are eating your sandwiches, can we try not to open boxes unnecessarily, because we want to take some sandwiches to the students in the encampment later. So if there are sandwiches left in one box, can you just, sorry, I sound like I'm talking to my kids. Could you just try and, let's have some stuff to give them at the end of the day, hopefully. Thank you.